And we are now recording.
Lovely.
All right.
So, I've tried to record as well. Have you come up with permission?
I am recording. Oh, can I grant permission?
Yeah.
Let's see. That's never come up before. How would I do that? Would it be all right if I just sent you a link to the recording?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So I go by KMO. Do you go by
Okay.
Daniel, or do you have a screen name?
I'm Social Experimentalist on YouTube, and Danny, my name.
How would you prefer to be addressed?
Danny's fine.
Okay.
So, I've got a YouTube channel, and I haven't really had any serious discussions about what I've come across over the past year and a half. So this will be kind of, I just very briefly introduce it just for the people who are going to watch it, who watch some of my stuff, where I'm at. And then I guess I'm looking for holes in my thinking, because I'm not very disciplined with my thinking. I don't think I am. So in the last, I became vegan about 2-3 years ago as a result of my 9-year-old going vegan. And I have 3 children, age 21, 19, and now 12. And I think from there, I started getting into discussions with people about veganism, and they would say, well, you know, what about all the damage you're doing to the other animals and to the plants and to the this and that and all the cruelty in the world. And then I sort of stumbled across antinatalism, and then I stumbled across in Mendham, who, for those who don't know, is a pretty radical, angry philosopher who has created a kind of an idea called ethylism, which is the idea that that life is basically flawed and it's an unintelligent design, and we should definitely not be bringing any more human life or any life into the planet. And if we could, we should just stop the whole game. And yeah, so and I've got 3 children of my own, and I've only come across this in the last year and a half. It's an interesting experience. I mean, I'm very vocal about it all, so they know full well what I'm saying. And I notice I've watched some of your stuff, and I see that you think things through carefully. And and okay, and I'm not exactly sure what your position on it, but it seemed from some of the videos, it seemed like that you went through a phase of being into antinatalism, and now I'm not sure that you are or where you are at. So I'm after that notion being challenged if it can be. So far, I've come across nothing very convincing at all against the arguments. So that's where I'm coming from.
Well, antinatalism. So I did a couple of videos on it in 2016, and that was a few years after I had encountered the concept, I think probably from the book, The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, A Contrivance of Horror by Thomas Ligotti. I have not read David Benatar's book, Better Never to Have Been, but I've seen plenty of interviews with him, and I've read summaries of his arguments, and they don't seem at all compelling to me. I don't know if we want to go into David Benatar and his arguments just yet, but in essence, he says that the presence of pain in real existing people is bad. The presence of pleasure in real existing people is good. The absence of pain in people who never come into existence is good, he says, and the absence of pleasure of people who never come into existence is neither good nor bad. It's just neutral. So you've got this asymmetry where there's always good in not existing, and there is the potential that the bad could outweigh the good if you do exist. So, you know, the safe bet, if your primary goal is to minimize suffering, is to never bring any new entities into existence. But you know, if the absence of pleasure in a non-existing person is neither good nor bad, then I would say that the absence of pain in a non-existent person is neither good nor bad. In fact, I would say that ascribing, a value judgment to something that doesn't exist is just nonsensical. It doesn't carry any persuasive weight whatsoever for me. So he seems like a good person who is interested in, minimizing human suffering and finding out what the right thing to do is, and, following the dictates of ethics. But the people that I encounter through these two videos that I did back in 2016 are not particularly interested in minimizing suffering. As far as I can tell, their main motivation seems to be resentment and anger, and it seems to be primarily directed at their own parents and then just generalized to parents, all parents. Basically, this is something that comes up in almost any popular belief system or philosophy, that the people who are articulating the message have a very different relationship to it than the people that they attract with that message. And that's really starkly evident in my encounters with antinatalists online. They don't tend to be proceeding from the genuine desire to, reduce suffering. They seem to be just angry, and they wave the antinatalist banner as a justification for their anger. It's a very different message than I get from people like David Benatar and Thomas Ligotti. So that's where I am with it. What's compelling about it? We seem to be driven to breed, not just for the pleasure of sexual intercourse, but just the thought of, continuing our life via somebody else. It seems to have a strong motivating effect in our behavior. And I think that comes from us being mammals. And more largely speaking, just living things. Living things reproduce themselves. That's something that living things do. It's neither praiseworthy, nor condemnatory. But humans having the ability to consider counterfactuals, to imagine, what if situations, we have the ability to think about things and make decisions about reproduction that most animals don't have. Does that ability, that rationality, and that ability to spin counterfactual scenarios then change our moral obligations to the non-existent, or to the creatures that we might bring into existence? Does it become a moral imperative for humans with our cognitive faculties to stop reproducing when no other animal, no other organism that we know of has any sort of similar moral obligation? That's a question. It's an open question. I don't have an answer to it.
Right. What? I mean,
sounds like you're coming from it from a very personal perspective. So why don't you just say more about that? What is it that's got a splinter under the the surface of your mind there that's irritating you?
Right. What you mean? What makes me so convinced by the arguments?
Sure. Start there. Summarize the argument that you find convincing.
Okay. Well, you see, one of the things that I've learned over the past few years, what I do, you may not have seen what I do, but it's that, it's the importance of asking questions. And I would turn it around to you. Like, I mean, you've got 2 children, haven't you?
I do, yes.
Why did you have them?
The first one, I mean, it's a colorful story, and I can't say that it has a neat message, but there was a woman. I wasn't married to her, but we were, we had a romance going, and we went to South America together, and we went there to drink ayahuasca. And we, when we were there, there was a curandera, a female ayahuasquero who we were going to have a ceremony with her. Neither one of us speak Spanish, and the curandera doesn't speak English, but she managed to communicate to us that she wanted to perform an ayahuasca marriage so that we would be, married in the spirit of ayahuasca. And
wait, were you married at the time?
We were not married. No.
Right. Okay.
And we did. And, we had been scrupulous about birth control up until that time. But then when we came back from South America, we had unprotected sex every single day for a month.
Right.
What happens when you do that? And we weren't talking about it with each other. We just stopped using birth control. She got pregnant. And we talked about it, and we decided that we were going to have an abortion. And we had an appointment set, and we were in my high-rise condo in downtown Seattle, and the time had come. It was time for us to get up off the couch, go down to the garage, get in the car, and drive to the clinic to have this abortion done. And I just said, I can't do it. I had felt a connection already to this being that I did not want to terminate the life of this being. And I'm not proselytizing on any position with regard to abortion. But in my case, when it came to the possibility of aborting my son or my child, I didn't know the gender at the time, I couldn't go through with it. So,
and what did she say?
The child exists, so she agreed.
She agreed.
Yep. And later, years later, she thanked me.
Right.
And then years later after that, she left me. But the second child was just more one, was intentional, and it was a matter of timing. We said, what do we want the age range? How many children do we want? What do we want the age range between them to be? And we just picked the time based on that.
Right.
And we were hoping for a daughter on the second one. We were hoping for a daughter on the first one, and we got 2 boys. So that was our lesson from the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went on, to her next husband and had another child and got another boy. So.
Okay. So basically, sorry to have to, I'm going to be blunt here. I hope you don't mind. Basically, you're just, grossly negligent, right? You went off to ayahuasca. Sorry, I'm just going to be blunt here, right? I know you don't know me, but I'm just playing a bit, right? You went up, from my point of view, I would just be really, you went off for ayahuasca, all very nice. Some crackpot of a so-called shaman says she wants to marry you with an ayahuasca ceremony, which is like a bit weird, right? You take the ayahuasca.
She was making money. I mean, she charged us for the service, so it was.
Oh.
That's her profession.
You got scammed, basically.
No, I mean, we went there for a particular experience. We paid money for it at every step along the way. We paid money for the airlines. We paid money for accommodations.
Yeah, no, I understand that. But she conned you into getting this ayahuasca marriage.
She proposed something.
Well, what? She did it to make some money off you.
Right. No, that was her role there. I mean, that's her profession.
Okay.
That's what
you can call that. I don't care what that can call her profession. It doesn't make it okay, right? As far as I'm concerned, some strange woman just tried to persuade you to go through some strange ceremony just so you should make money. I don't care if you can call that profession. There's lots of dodgy professions around. So she did that. You were convinced, right? And you went away, and then you basically, for some strange reason, you just acted recklessly for a month. Yeah.
You can say it that way if you want to. I would say that our motivations were non-rational.
Okay. Fair enough. So you see, the reason why I asked you that question is because I have been asking this question to a lot of people, and I haven't really found anybody who's come up with a half decent answer as to why on earth you would bring children into the world. Whether David Benatar's particular argument about, possible people and not people, and whether you can do harm to someone who's not come and all that sort of thing, to me that's kind of slightly abstract, because to me it just seems obvious now, even though I've already had my children, that bringing them here was basically falling for the ultimate conspiracy. And I haven't read that book that you mentioned. I'd be interested to know what it says. But for me, nature, the way Mendham speaks makes sense to me, even though I don't particularly like it or whatever. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It's very sharp, right? But that nature itself is a nasty force that is, beyond, makes Hitler look like a lovely, charming chap. In terms of, it's happy. The whole game is just so full and ravaged with violence, and and nature conspired through sexuality, through I don't know, some kind of inbuilt desire for us, like you said before, for us to carry on. It's ridiculous. The whole idea that me, for example, look at myself, the whole idea that I should want for me to carry on and to bring little half versions of me into the world is such, when I look about it now, to me, that's absolutely crazy. I've got issues, you know, I'm not perfect, nobody is. I'm not medically perfect, physically perfect, I'm not mentally perfect. And I want to have little replicas of my life running around, screwed up little screw-ups, running around the place with half of my wife's genes and all her madness and my genes, right? And I think that nature and nurture, so nature and the system and the whole of society conspires by this tiny little 10-second bit of pleasure, right, of ejaculation, conspires to get us to reproduce so it can keep on going. Yeah, and we are it seems to me that we are the only beings, like you said, that are able to you know, to overcome our natural desires and instincts. And it seems like nature is the biggest trickster of all. And it seems to me that all the problems, no, maybe not all the problems, but because you've got the animals as well, but leaving the animals and all the other suffering of the animals, yeah, you know, a huge amount, or perhaps a huge, or perhaps all of the problems in the world can be just solved by us just not carrying on with this whole ridiculous situation. And by having my children, I didn't think at the time, I didn't think all the way to the end of their lives. I just thought, oh, let's have a child because I like babies, yeah. But even liking babies, I didn't really realize that I wasn't necessarily going to enjoy hanging out with 1-year-old and 2-year-old and 3-year-old and 4 for ages. I might like them for a little bit, but I never thought through the whole thing. I never really thought through even the fact that I'm going to send them to school, the fact that they're may have to work, the fact that they're going to get old, the fact that they may have cancer, the fact that they're going to cause so much harm to other people, they're going to cause so much harm to animals, they're going to be harmed themselves. You know, I forget David Benatar's philosophical argument. To me, it seems like, why would you do that to someone? What for? What's the benefit of it? It seems the only benefit seems to be an incredibly selfish, myopic one, and one based on some ridiculous notion that somehow if I have children and that then I die, I'm not really dying because they're carrying on the family name or what. It just, for me, as I look back on it, that seems absolutely absurd.
Well, my family name is fairly common, so it doesn't bother me one way or another whether my kids perpetuate it.
Or perpetuate you. Do you want your? Do you think that why would you want them yourself, your half of your genes and half of your partner's genes? Yeah, why would you want that to carry on in the world? For?
Because I am a living organism, and that's something that, you know, successful living organisms do, is they reproduce themselves.
Yeah, I get that, but you're a human living organism, and yeah, the difference between you and all the other animals is that you can overcome those desires and urges, and you can examine them. So, for example, I'm assuming that every time you get a natural urge to sleep with a woman that you find sexually attractive, you don't just give in to that natural urge. You say no. You know, even though, you know, I'm born with a natural urge to sleep with anything that walks so that I can perpetuate myself. You, like 90% of other people, don't go around doing that. There are some people that do, right? And it's horrible, you know, just go around sleeping with everyone left, right, and center and leaving them with their children and going off to the next woman, yeah? But you don't do that, right? That's the same force, isn't it?
Apparently not. You know, with this particular woman, I had been using contraception consistently for a good long time. I don't remember how long we'd been together at that point. And then later, you know, after we had the first child, I returned to using contraception. It's just that in that month, with the both of us, we checked out from our rational perspective, and we gave in to a stronger imperative.
Yeah, I get that, and I'm saying that 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 was an irrational choice, and in my opinion, from when I look at it now, I think it's a difficult choice to justify morally. That it's just reckless what you did.
Well,
You brought the child into
consider
the
this.
world.
This
Was
is
that?
something I hear from vegans a lot, is that species have no right to exist. Only individuals suffer. And so if we stop raising particular breeds of animal, for slaughter, those breeds are going to go extinct. Those species will go extinct. But that's fine because, as long as there are no animals being raised and slaughtered in horrible conditions and having, being forced to undergo this really miserable existence, short but miserable existence, it doesn't matter if the species no longer exists. And the arguments that you are posing seem to come from a hyper individualist perspective. If I'm procreating, it's for me, the individual, to project myself into the future, and you find that to be condemnatory. But I'm not projecting myself into the future. I am perpetuating my species. Does my species have a right to continued existence? And it doesn't really matter if it has a right that satisfies you. It has arranged for its continued existence through these powerful urges built into us and all living things. And, I look out into the cosmos with my unaided eye. I can't see much, but, with radio telescopes and optical telescopes and, the various means that we have to explore the universe, we see huge, huge, just uncalculable, unfathomable, inconceivable, vast swaths of lifelessness, of nothing happening, that is directed by a conscious intelligence. And there is this one itty bitty tiny little speck of a dot that we know of in the known universe where there is life, and it's here. And it seems weird to me to think, well, we should just brush that out. We should just extinguish that so it is uniformly lifeless as far as the eye can see, if there were an eye, but there won't be, because we're going to make sure there are no future eyes. I just don't see that that's a compelling, imperative that we should extinguish life.
Mm. Well, yeah. I mean, you're again. This is, to me, you're sounding a bit like a little bit emotional about it all.
Sure, I'm an emotional being. I have emotions. My rationality doesn't work very well without them. We find that people who are completely devoid of emotion tend to make very poor choices.
Okay, fair enough. Let me ask you a different question that you probably heard before. If you could press a button, there's a green button on your desk, and it would, uh, if you press the button, it would set up life on Mars, just like there is here. Yeah, and all the things that happened over the years, all the wars and the madness and the and the joy and the sex, but all the wars and the illness and the cancer and people having their legs chopped off without anesthetic and all the everything, all the illness, thousands of illnesses, and all that, and that was, and like you'd create that on Mars. Would you press the button?
Probably not, but that's only because Mars is so close, and I think that humans will be using it for their own purposes.
Okay, forget that. Whatever. Somewhere else where there isn't life.
Sure.
Would you create life where there's someone there isn't? With all
Yeah,
that.
if I have the power of a god and I can say, "Let there be light and life," I would do that.
You would?
Mm-hmm.
I find that absolutely abhorrent. I really do. I find that just like abhorrent. I mean, let me ask you a different question, which is the same kind of question in a different way. It just seems I just don't get it. Right? A different question, and it. Okay. Another thing that I would share with you is that where I'm at, and I can't really explain it properly. Therefore, I'm not the right person really to talk about it. But is that I kind of, at the moment, I'm quite interested in Thomas Metzinger's work. Have you come across him?
Thomas Metzinger, give me some more information.
He's a philosopher, and he speaks about ego. He's got a book called The Ego Tunnel, and he explains how we create a model of ourselves that isn't really ourselves. It's like a virtual reality, that we're living in a virtual reality. He's one of several teachers that talk about virtual reality. And so he basically is saying, and him and another guy I follow called Tom Campbell, basically what they're saying is that we are actually already in a virtual reality, right? And it's not difficult for, let's just say though for a moment, it's not difficult for you to imagine that, you know, in maybe even in your children's lifetime, that your children will be able to go into some kind of booth, have themselves, you know, have electrodes plugged into them, and maybe some camera or something on their face, and then they could have pretty much the same human experience as we're having right now, but without moving, and just stuck in a room, and they'd be being fed all the right information to their neurons, which would make it feel like they were having a human experience, but they were like the Matrix, right? Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that being possible, right?
Sure.
It's not a million miles away, right? Now, if you were the producer of that game, yeah, it's like a game, right? You were a producer of that virtual reality. You were the code writer. You wrote the code for that game, and in that game, the avatars, right? You could program within them the ability to feel intense pain and suffering and sadness and awful things, right? And illness and you know, and competition and killing and all this stuff, yeah. And you were the programmer, and you programmed this game. And would you include the possibility of the avatars in the game feeling viscerally pain and suffering? Would you include that in the game?
The avatars or the non-player characters?
No, would you write it? So if in other words, let's say your son, yeah, was, you know, went into this room and played this game, yeah, he could go into a room and he could play various games, and you were the programmer of the game that your son was going to experience, yeah, and he goes into this room and he puts on this headset, and he puts on these electrodes and he presses play. And would you build into the game the possibility that your son would have 3 children, would want to have 3 children himself, because you program him like that, yeah? You right? You're going to want to have children, you're going to want to have sex, yeah? And you program that in, and then you programmed in the possibility that when the children were like 7 and 9, that his partner would get terrible cancer, have to have chemo, and would die, leaving the children without a mum, yeah? Would you program that into the game?
So my son has a choice as to whether or not he's going to go and experience this game, correct?
Yeah.
He voluntarily enters into the situation knowing that the possibility exists that he might suffer.
No, I see. Does your son have the choice to experience this game? Well, I mean, not in a way, not.
So it's not a game. It is an experience that I'm imposing.
You've imposed the game on him.
Choose it.
What's that?
What you're describing, I think, is not a game, but it is a simulated experience that I would be imposing upon somebody who didn't choose it and who doesn't have any way to get out of it except suicide.
Correct.
Okay, in that situation. Now, the green button, you know, to create life on Mars, you gave me no control. I can push the button or not. There can be life or not. Now you've changed the parameters. Now I have the ability as the programmer to weight the scenario such that some experiences are more likely than others. In that situation, given my sentimentality as a human being, yeah, I would create the universe such that pleasure was much more likely to happen than pain, and that pain would be transitory, and that pleasure would outweigh pain, even if pain was more, frequent and prevalent. Sure. If I had that level of control, I would make a benevolent universe for the subjects who are inside of it to experience. You didn't give me that option on Mars. It was either life or no life, and I chose life.
You would do that here, and I'm saying whoever programmed the code for this game, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can see, it was some kind of sicko, some kind of just completely sick, right? Either sick or kind of autistic, had suffered from whatever created this game, had some kind of block or inability to see past. It was so excited by its all clever little game that it got everything to reproduce and evolve and all that's clever, yeah. That it wasn't able to foresee all the suffering and the madness and the the illnesses and all this stuff, right? It just seems to me to be like whatever created the game seems to me to be just horrible. Yeah. So in Mendham, have you come across in Mendham?
I have not.
Oh, you haven't.
Wait, this is the person who coined Ephilism?
Yeah.
Yeah, blonde-haired guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Craggy face. Yeah, I've watched a couple of his videos. I haven't followed him. I couldn't pretend to represent his point of view.
Okay. So to his point of view, it makes sense to me. His point of view is that every time we have sex with a woman, every time a man has sex with a woman, unprotected sex with a woman, yeah, they are both playing Frankenstein, right? And they're playing this terrible roulette game where, you know, they don't know what they're gonna produce. They might produce someone that's really ill. They might produce someone that's really nasty. They might whatever. They don't know what they're going to produce. Yeah, they're taking half the genes of one, half the genes of the other. The genes that have come through their parents, God knows what they've got wrong with them, right? And they're sort of imposing this life on the nothingness that was there before, quite happily in its nothingness. Imposing life.
Nothingness. It was neither. It was not happy in its nothingness.
Okay, whatever. It was just nothing. It was nothing in its nothingness. Okay, yeah. It was peaceful in its nothingness, right? And
it wasn't peaceful in its nothingness. There is no quality that you can ascribe to something that doesn't exist other than non-existence. Anything else is just it's window dressing that takes away from your ability to look at the situation and understand the dynamics involved here. Non-existent people have no qualities. Non-existent people do not behave in any way. They have no interests. They have no desires. They have no rights.
Okay.
They don't exist.
They don't need any. They don't need to have any rights.
What's that?
They don't need.
It makes no sense to say that they do have rights. It's just a nonsensical formulation.
I'm not talking about them having rights. Yeah, I'm not talking about that.
Reverting to the idea that the only locus of agency in humanity is the individual, the person contained inside the skull, inside the skin. But for humanity to continue, we have to reproduce. And as you say, it's not a perfect system. Sometimes things go awry. That's the price that, we pay for continued existence as a species. Some of us suffer more than others, horribly so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and it's not just some. Lots and lots and lots of people suffer a lot. I live a very, very privileged lifestyle, extremely privileged, and I still suffer and struggle.
Some of that suffering probably comes from your feelings of extreme privilege.
Maybe. But, there are lots and lots and lots of people who suffer a lot more than I do. And I'm sorry to have to say this, but maybe I just feel less sentimentality about the human race, and quite the opposite. Because when I look around me, right, I see, and I go out in the world, I see, a huge amount of exploitation. Everything's exploiting everyone. We're all exploiting each other. Right, I mean, everything. Just now, like you and me, like just here now. Look at this. This T-shirt, right, was exploited. It was got by exploitation, right? My Apple computer, there's a whole exploitation. Yeah, my trousers, my everything around this, all exploiting people, exploiting the earth. Right, it's all about exploitation. Why do you want to continue the human race? Who cares? What for? Why? What for?
Well, again, I look out at the universe, which appears to be almost entirely lifeless. The place where life occurs is such seemingly an incredible irregularity. It just doesn't make sense to me to say that's a problem. We should extinguish that. We should do whatever we can to make sure that doesn't keep happening. I don't see it that way. I see that this is a very unique phenomenon, as far as we can tell, going on right here. It seems rather remarkable. Let's see where it goes.
Right. I guess probably on that point, we probably just have to agree to disagree. I
Well, it's
agree
a
with
question of
you.
temperament, I think.
What's that?
It's a question of temperament. In the Conspiracy Against the Human Race, Thomas Ligotti argues and admits that, look, the position I'm laying out is never going to be popular because we are, as biological organisms, predisposed to see reproduction as a good thing. And so I realize I'm not, making an argument that a lot of people are going to take up. It's not ever going to have the desired effect. I'm just saying, look, some of us feel differently, and we don't like the way, not only do we not like the suffering that comes from life, but we don't like the way that the breeders look down on us and treat us as,
Right.
some subhuman thing. And sure,
Did he have children?
What's that?
Did he not have children?
He does not have children. He describes himself as
Still
suffering
alive?
from anhedonia. He can't enjoy anything. He can't be happy.
Say that again.
Anhedonia, the inability to experience pleasure, that's how he describes his existence.
Is he still alive?
Yes.
Wow. Really? He can't enjoy anything?
So he says.
Wow. That's heavy.
Yeah.
Maybe we should get him some drugs so that he can enjoy things.
Well, actually, his condition he attributes, as far as I recall, to an LSD experience. That he had a very profound LSD experience, which afterwards he was unable to experience pleasure.
Wow.
It broke his brain, which, I've done a lot of psychedelics, and I think highly of them. I think they are useful tools for living, but people do damage themselves with their use.
Well, maybe he didn't damage himself. Maybe he's right. Maybe there's a case you could argue for not experiencing pleasure whilst there's so much suffering in the world. In a way, it takes some denial for us to experience the pleasure, whilst round the corner or everywhere you look, there are people who are experiencing intense suffering.
Yeah, our ability to perceive the world and make sense of it is not absolute, and our intellect was not designed to help us understand how the universe works. It was designed to help us survive, reproduce, find food, create shelter for ourselves, satisfy our biological needs. And it's amazingly good at that. But it has also introduced our ability to, think about what if things were different, and how should we behave in the present, knowing that there are multiple futures which are possible and which are dependent on our actions. And it's an uncomfortable position. I mean, it is an uncomfortable thing to have these sorts of realizations, but really not be equipped to follow them through and examine existence and the ethical implications of our actions with perfection, with perfect clarity. We really are groping in the dark in a lot of ways, but some of our groping is quite uncomfortable. And that's what I get from a lot of antinatalists who seem to be coming from a place of philanthropy, which I think that's what I'm getting from you. You object to suffering because it sucks to be a suffering individual.
Yeah, it's interesting coming back to parents. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I would say to you, on the one hand, I kind of jokingly have spoken to my father recently about compensating me for bringing me here and not bringing me up correctly.
About the guy in India who's suing his parents, right?
I'm seriously thinking of doing that as well, right? But I have a good relationship with my dad, right? And my mum's not alive anymore, but I have a good relationship with my dad. I go walking with him on a regular basis. I'm sure that deep down there's some anger I have with him for having me and having 5 of us, actually. He decided to have 5 children, which is a lot. Probably somewhere there's some anger. But I don't think I count as one of those people that you're talking about. Although I think that people who have had a bad experience here have a good reason to be angry with their parents for bringing them here, because a lot of the time their parents didn't really think it through properly. Their parents may not have had enough money. Their parents may not have been emotionally stable enough. Whatever. There's lots of things I think you should have in place before you even consider having children. And I can understand why their parents are angry, but for me, it's not like that. And therefore, for me, I have started saying to my own children that I really don't want to be a grandpa, and I really question why you would carry this whole thing on when you can have you can have my preference with that they wouldn't do that, and they can have a fantastic life. If they want to make the world a better place, they're much better, in my opinion, they're much better positioned to do that without having to deal with children of their own. If they really want to be parents and they think they'll be so good at it, good luck to them with that. If they do, then they can adopt if they really, really have to. But why bring that? Because it was, my father, as I've said to my father recently, and he, as I say, we have this sort of quite a humorous sort of banter relationship. I said, you are responsible for the deaths of 20 people so far. That's 5 children and 15 grandchildren, and they're all going to die. Some of them are going to get cancer. And as it goes on and on and on, yeah. So you've got 2 kids in 10 generations. That's going to end up being, if they all have 2 kids, that's going to end up being 2 to the power of 10, whatever that is, right? Not 1,000. That's 1,000 people on the planet. They're going to be 1,000 people on the planet, yeah, with a whole mixed mass of genes coming from you. Some of them are going to be crippled. Some of them are going to be psychopaths. Some of them are going to die of cancer. Some of them are, God knows, some of them may be, really intelligent and great musicians, but so what? Like, why would you want, what do you tell your children?
My children have never demanded to know, for me to account for their existence. I don't think people demand that. It's an aberrant mentality.
What do you mean? Why?
Well, by definition, something that a tiny minority of people engage in that most people don't is aberrant.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Fine. Yeah. Okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Right. Aberrant means just out of the normal. Out of the
exactly.
Normal. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. No. Then it is. Yeah. Absolutely. Like a very unusual thing. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your question?
What would you like your children to do?
This is important. The decision not to have children based on one person's specific circumstances is not antinatalism. It's just a decision not to have children. Antinatalism, the ISM at the end, means there is a philosophical belief and commitment that somebody has to saying that a certain choice is right. And I don't think that it is always right to have children. I don't think it's always right to not have children. I think if you are looking at your circumstances and making a decision based on, how your ability to provide for them, the circumstances that you'd be bringing them into, these are all things to consider. And I think for my kids, given the economic situation that they're in, given the political situation that they're in, it's probably quite rational to either not have children at all or to put it off until much later in life. And being men, that is their privilege. I would be displeased to learn that either one of them, in their teens, had fathered a child,
right?
Or even in their early 20s. I would be.
How would you feel if they told you that they were going to have a vasectomy?
I'm not sure. I've had a vasectomy, but it's after having 2 children. How would I feel? I'm not sure. I'm spinning the scenario right now, and then I'm looking inward for some emotion, and I'm not coming up with anything.
Okay. Well, listen, I've enjoyed the chat. I don't know if there's anything more you want to talk about, or any other part of it, of this conversation, or any other aspects of the conversation. I still feel at the end of the conversation, I still feel like I'm still looking for holes in the argument, because I can't see, what Emendum says seems to make a lot of sense, that there is just, what's it for? What's the point of, you seem to want to carry on this whole game just because it's an unusual thing happening on this lifeless universe. To me, I just think the game is so flawed. It's so cruel. It's so horrible. There's so much waste. There's so much suffering and madness. That bringing in children, just I can't see what the justification is, because you're bringing in, they are going to experience serious harm. They're going to experience serious harm because, you know, nature is either going to get them, or the horrible, disgusting, as far as I see it, the disgusting system and culture with the word cult. It is a cult. We're living in a cult, and it's horrible, nasty cult. And you know, my children, I'm already sort of, you know, losing them to an extent to Instagram. It's horrible.
How old are your children?
21, 19, and 12.
Okay.
And the 12-year-old's already on Instagram, yeah? You know, so they're being harmed by that. Yeah, it's harmful, right? And they're harmed by, you know, they're being harmed by the food that they're being offered left, right, and center. They're being harmed by the alcohol that's everywhere. They're being harmed by the school and the school system. They're being, you know, and they're harmed by, there's a big potential they're going to be harmed by nature. They might be in an accident. They might have a horrible disease. You know, my wife's cousin's now been diagnosed, 15 years old, diagnosed with cancer. You know, why bring a child? Why bring a person here if there's a chance that they're going to get that? I mean, there's a 1 in 3 chance that we're going to get cancer. That means I got 3 children. That means that I'm almost guaranteed that one of them going to have to go through that. Why didn't I think about that before I had them?
Why didn't you?
Why didn't you before you had yours?
Oh, I did. I had determined in my early 20s that I wasn't going to have children, that I was going to devote my life and my energies to spreading what I thought to be good ideas.
Right.
And it wasn't until I took leave of, you know, that rational process that I ended up having a child.
Okay.
Yeah. But
all right, listen,
the thing I'd like to end on, which I think is important,
yeah,
is this. And key to my understanding of what you said is, as far as I can reason, as far as I can tell, as far as I can determine, given the information available to me right now, it doesn't make any sense that we should continue this process, this game of life, as you've called it. But if you call it a game, I mean, remember you asked me about the game scenario. My son is going to go into this room and he's going to have this completely immersive experience. And I ask you, did he agree to it? Is he doing this voluntarily? And, you know, by saying it's a game, that implies yes. And then you had to reformulate. You said, no, it's actually, you know, an experience being imposed upon somebody who had no choice. And we don't know if we had a choice or not. It could be that we have come into this incarnate experience knowing full well in advance that we are going to suffer through it. But we also knew before we began that there would come an end. And at the end, we would be released from suffering and it would be good. But we don't know. We don't know if that's the case or not.
Okay, that's a very interesting argument. I'll definitely have a little think about that. That is an interesting argument, because that is an argument that is argued by someone called, another guy that I've been following, who's Tom Campbell. He's a really interesting guy. Check him out as well. And he's like a consciousness. Both him and Metzinger are like interested in consciousness, and they've done lots of experiments in consciousness. He claims that is what happens, kind of, that we choose. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I hear what you're saying. Okay, I'll give that some thought. It's been really good talking to you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much. And send me the link.
Okay, I'll upload it to Dropbox and send you a link.
Okay, lovely.
All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.